Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much. I left you, at least I intended to leave you, in the secret garden of the Primavera. La Primavera was the last of the wonderful secret gardens. It was allegorical, and as I think I explained, all the flowers represented the souls of dead heroes, and the entire garden is a story about the souls coming into the world, being generated in the world, experience all that is, and being whisked back to the spirit world. So the Primavera was deeply heretical because it was Neoplatonic in the 15th century in Florence. So I left you there, but what happened next was that the force of the Renaissance swept all that away, and we came closer and closer to a world where people wanted to look at things more scientifically, and we edged slowly towards the Enlightenment. So today we're going to backtrack a tiny bit to Leonardo da Vinci, and then we're going to move on. We're going to see how flowers went on to inspire people, but not through the medieval poetry of the Romance of the Rose, not through the wonderful symbolism of the Gothic cathedrals, but through the science of it. So let's go on and see. First of all, we look at this drawing. You're looking at a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo, as we know, was a great polymath. But there was nothing that escaped his attention. Rocks, wind, animals and plants. And while he's making this drawing of this plant, he's looking at the formation of the flowers, the formation of the leaves. And I think the painting which shocked people most, that he made he made it over a period of 8 years actually, was the Virgin of the Rocks. The Virgin is placed in a natural environment of water and mountains and air, a real space, not a golden cosmos. There are no angels flying around. There are no harps playing. And when the nuns saw her, they were appalled and they refused to pay. By the way, she doesn't have a halo. She's an ordinary village girl sitting in a cave with 2 children. The halo was painted on by somebody else who tried to correct his terrible oversight. And it's something about the mysticism of the soul, this extraordinary visionary landscape. But then also you have the anger and the aggression of those teeth-like shapes of the rocks. In the Paris version of the same painting, we see that the 2 babies are sitting among a whole lot of plants and flowers, and there are plants and flowers all around. There are a number of extraordinary things about the painting. The Madonna is sitting on the ground. The Latin word for ground is humus, and from that we get the word humility. So when you see the Virgin seated on the ground, she would be the Virgin of humility. She's seated on the ground with 2 babies, but it's very unclear which baby is the Christ child and which baby is the Baptist. Because in the Paris version, nobody corrected him by putting in the halos and the reed with the cross on it that John, which is this one is identified as John in the London version, would normally have. The talk that I'm doing is not particularly about this painting, but we could go on a long way. Why is the Virgin looking at John? Why is the Archangel Uriel pointing at John? Why is the Christ child looking up at John in the psychologically lower position and blessing him? What is Leonardo saying? Are we looking at a famous and very buried heresy that was very prevalent in Florence? So the point is, here is the Virgin, not on a throne, not surrounded by a golden cosmos, but on the earth as a Virgin of humility, not even with a halo or anything to identify her sacred. As we move on about 100 years, we've come into Michelangelo da Caravaggio. And most people go, oh, when they hear his name, because of his amazing power. Michelangelo is also from roughly near Milan, but he moved down to Rome, and his early specialty was painting these vases and bowls of flowers. And when you look at that basket of fruit, you are tempted to see something lush and extravagant and generous, and you're not tempted to get the message. So the message was that this was a vanitas, that the fruit will rot, and indeed the boy himself, who is quite as luscious as the grapes and peaches and apples, if you're Caravaggio, or any other Roman of the time, but you see his beauty is going to fade. And the way that Caravaggio portrayed him, with what appear to be black wings, he almost looks like the evil angel of Charles Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal. Of course, that's a different period altogether, but I have the feeling that Caravaggio saw him in that way. We can normally date Caravaggio's paintings if you do know the faces of his lovers. So it's a kind of nice way of dating a painting. Well, you can see how he's looking directly at you. That's the first thing, the eye contact, the shoulder bare, the fruit there being offered as all the fullness of life, which will pass away. I was just saying, for the lady who came in, that the painting is not so much a hopeful painting as a painting about the fact that the world rots and everything rots, and it's called a vanitas, and it is a reminder that time passes and that in the world things will rot away. This is a most wonderful painting. It's in Milan, if you go to Milan, and at first you think it's unfinished. But why it's interesting is that it's telling you about the plants, the fruit, as they suffer illnesses in this world, almost in this fallen world. All of these fruit and flowers have got illnesses, and Caravaggio was the first person to depict this sort of thing. So you've got a number of things, at least 17 different kinds of fruit are found in his paintings, and many of them are cultivars, and they show various illnesses that can be identified. And it shows that during the Baroque period, we're now at the end of the 1600s, nudging into the 17th, that at this time there was a scientific interest in these plants. Now, I've written probably far too much for you, but I can read out that the peach stem shows wormholes and leaf damage from an oriental fruit moth, which is actually identifiable damage. So the peach stem is up here at the back. And then you've got the two-tone apple right down here, which shows the marks of codling moth that have entered the apple in two places. You can see it there and there. And the pear, which is tucked away behind the leaf of the grape, that pear shows insect damage by a particular leaf roller, and we have his name. That's the pear right there. And then we find that the 4 figs, the purple ones, are split open, and there's a large fig leaf with prominent fungal scorch lesions, a very particular illness which anybody who grows figs will be able to identify. We're not just making them look old to try and remind you that you're all going to die. It's nothing as simple as that. He's actually identifying particular illnesses that plants have. And then there's one more. We've got the quince down here. Here's the quince. So that leaf shows certain fungal marks as well. And we've got a couple of grapes that look a bit mummified. And then there is the eating of these leaves by a grasshopper. So that is one way that Caravaggio broke into new ground. But he also used fruit and plants symbolically, as had been the tradition. And the painting you're looking at here is one of the greatest paintings in the National Gallery in London. In fact, one of the greatest paintings in the world. And it shows us not the Last Supper, which you will probably be thinking of. It's not the Last Supper. It shows us the supper at Emmaus. This was the supper that took place on the Sunday night when everybody had run away from Jerusalem. And these 2 disciples had run up to Emmaus, 12 kilometers away from Jerusalem, and a stranger joined them in the inn, or joined them on the way. And this painting here, you see that the fruit are falling off the table. That is a very clever way of saying, actually, you or whoever is living 500 years after I'm dead, because remember he's painting this in 1601, that's for you. That's why this is an asymmetrical composition, not just because it's Baroque, but in order to make a space for anybody who's coming afterwards to join at the table. Now, how to get you to go there is to have the basket falling off. Can you all see? Or indeed to have these extraordinary hands, 2 arms coming out and 1 going back, forming a receding triangular shape that simply plummets you towards the center of the painting. I could talk about this painting for a very, very long time, but we have to just point out the fact that, again, it's a kind of vanitas, because the Christ figure, who's in red and white, as he always is after the crucifixion, is looking down at the basket of fruit and sort of saying, well, there's the problem, really sorry, there you go, and raise his hand over the bread, I am the bread of life. So that is the backstory of the painting. There's a lot more to, and I haven't got time to go into it all. But as we come closer, we see that the fruit are all very symbolic. The apple is rotting, which is a reminder of the fall in the Garden of Eden, and we talked about Eden yesterday quite a lot. We have the grapes on the top as a reminder of the Eucharistic wine, and then on the side a pomegranate, which is always a symbol of the Passion. So, in the shadow of the basket, can anybody see anything? Good, of course. Cape Townians should be able to recognize a fishtail. Right, so that's really clever, and when you see the painting as a whole, you can just see it, and that is there that tells me that Caravaggio had been into the catacombs that had been very recently rediscovered with a little flickering oil lamp and seen scratched fish on all these funerary slabs. And he'd seen the Greek letters, ichthus, and he understood that the fish was a symbol for Christ. It's Greek, Iusus Christus Theou Soter in Greek. Of course, they're walking around in Rome, so they're saying it in Latin, Iusus Christus Dei Filus Salvator, but it doesn't work as an acrostic in Latin. So that is what the fishtail is there. So the point is that Caravaggio had a very big influence on the Dutch, and I'm using him as a sort of bridge to take us up to Holland. And I hope Nadine enjoys this part of the talk. So as we go up to Holland, we find that the people of the Utrecht area particularly fell under the influence of Caravaggio. You can see it in the painting of the glass jar with all the reflections shining through, which I think we had, if we go back to there, you can see a glass jar there, but he painted them in many of his paintings. The Flemish and the Dutch, they just loved flowers. They loved flowers. And this is a very small, simple, unpretentious still life by David Seegers. He's a Flemish Baroque painter. 2 parrot tulips and some roses, and a rosebud. They love flowers so much that you could do nothing in your life. You could go your whole life simply studying Dutch flower painting. When you look into them, you see an amazing world of sort of unbelievable shape and color. This one is a festoon of fruit and flowers by Jan Davids de Heem in 1660. So we're right on the middle of the 17th century. And it's not just the flowers and the fruit, but it's also the insects, the bees, the birds, the whole thing of nature. This is just an extraordinary painting. He's even got a mummified grape, if you look up there. The master of all the great flower painters, the sort of acknowledged master, is Jan van Heesen. And I encountered Jan van Heesen when I was about 18, and I've been madly in love with his work ever since. And he just had a tremendous sensitivity to flowers. And he was a painter of Amsterdam, as you can see right here. Well, I'm now going to plunge you for a few minutes into a Van Heesen bath, all right? And you're going to experience what I experienced when I was 18. I simply couldn't take it in. Seeing these not as flowers, but almost as an abstraction. Just look at this. When you look at this, you can't believe the skill of the artist. It's not just painting flowers. It's putting one color in front of the other color. It's putting one shape in opposition to another shape. It's allowing you to recede. You can recede here through to the Saxe blue, and all of these colors that are in harmony with Saxe blue, lifted by the blonde color of this very crisp but delicate grass that is right in the foreground and arches over, brings your eye back. And then up the sharp diagonal here, and this amazing tulip, these tulips beginning to get waxy with age, and all around a very, very sharp daisy as a sort of repoussoir that pushes the rest of the tones back. And you see that even the wing of the butterfly, some of that golden color, which is slightly picked up underneath the leaf, almost as if the butterfly's color is reflected on the leaf. And the waxiness of these flowers here, just the sheer skill of it, but also somehow it seems relaxed. It's like music that's perfect, where every instrument is playing the right sound at the right time, it's got this feeling of being absolutely perfect. Down here, a cabbage white, as you can see. There's a cabbage white. And his whiteness really sets off these dark reds, which could be, I'm not sure quite what they're meant to be, whether they're meant to be chrysanthemums. Of course, right at the center, star of the show really, behind the tulips, is the wonderful iris. Very difficult to paint because of all its folding petals. And you see here how you go back through the layers. I'm not sure how good this, on my screen I can see many, many layers as I go back and back and back. So the light is falling on the front of the tulip, but it's also creeping around and falling on the pale green at the back. Absolutely amazing. Look at this. Here you've got the center of the painting receding, because the tones are dark in the center. So the center of the painting is receding back like that, stopped by this orange color right in the center here. I'm afraid your color's a bit different. And then all the light colors here gathering on the left. Again, a completely masterly painting with something that sets it off in the little blue forget-me-nots that exactly contrast the purple of the primulas or whatever they are right behind them. So he could do this endlessly. It was just like the way Shakespeare wrote poetry. It just poured off the end of his brush. This is an amazing, irregular, random, tremendously sumptuous vase of flowers, and it's just simply called a bouquet of flowers in an urn. Why did they paint them? They painted them because real flowers were so very, very expensive. It was actually cheaper to invest in one of these paintings than to try and put real flowers in your house. The cost of flowers was simply unbelievable. And you would have to often wait, because the artist would sometimes paint different flowers when they came out, and you'd have to wait for the next one to come out. In the case of this wonderful vase, they are spring flowers. You see here you've got a lovely, just a little apple blossom right at the top there. He's got a butterfly that exactly picks up the color of the flowers up here. And then as you come down, you see more and more spring flowers. This is a stock. I think it's a scented stock. I can't really see. You know, I'm in a very bad place because I can't see the screen. It's too close. Whoever put this here, it should have been somewhere over here. Okay. Right, so you can see from here, so you've got, that looks like a stock, and here you've got bluebells and many different kinds of flowers. And so, as we come down to the bottom of the vase, some of the flowers have collapsed. You've got a lovely oriental poppy that's just flopped right down onto the ledge. And again, the tulip is beginning to go over, and there's a little white cabbage white flying away in the corner there. So masterly, I can't really, it's beyond words for me. Look at it almost as an abstract painting. This one, I have the sense that he's glazed it, maybe with burnt umber, because the whole painting is pushed back a bit, and he might have just polished off the glaze wherever the white flowers are. The point is, they're not just flower paintings. They were an invitation to meditate on the call to faith. We are in Holland. Holland has thrown off the yoke of the Spanish Catholic rulers who suppressed, I don't want to say it, wrong word, suppressed, who controlled southern Holland for a very long time. And so in the 17th century, Holland is suddenly free of the Spanish overlords, and that gives them tremendous confidence. And with that confidence, they went out and they traded with the whole world. And they brought back rugs, and they brought back pepper and spices and all kinds of things. And Holland became very rich. They brought back porcelain. Holland was very rich in the 17th century. So this abundance is somehow expressed in these amazing flower paintings. Again, at the top, you have the mix of things. It's rather the same, that you've got blossom on the right, you've got an oriental poppy, just a bud right up there. What is this called? That's what I thought, fritillary, thank you. Didn't want to get it totally wrong. And a dear little yellow butterfly right in the middle. And with the butterflies, you have the sense that you're looking at something that's changing. If you look a second later, the butterflies will have all gone somewhere else. It's not a still life. The point about a still life is it's still. It's not a still life. This one is a different painter. It's Jan David de Heem again, and it's crisp and sort of set against a very black background. But it's still very beautiful. This one's been in the National Gallery very recently, actually. Just very crisp and very simple. It hasn't got the layering of Van Heesem. Again, a much smaller vase, where he stuffed the top of a hollyhock in there, and more pink. But right at the bottom, there is a watch, a fob watch, which really shows that the Dutch couldn't resist a little bit of symbolism. So the watch would again be an allusion to time passing. Time passing. You will frequently see somebody smoking a pipe in a Dutch painting, smoking one of those long clay pipes. Do you know if you've seen that? Yeah? You frequently see that in Dutch painting. Well, that was again, it's a sort of a memento mori, because it alludes to the fact that life passes very fast. It alludes to the words of a psalm. My days, O Lord, pass like smoke in the air. Of course, again, you're talking about a Protestant country, so the Old Testament, the Psalms, very important. So now we come to the tulips. And this tulip is, again, if you saw that, the size of the Eiffel Tower or something, you wouldn't be able to believe the engineering, the delicacy of it and the folds and everything. Simply an amazing thing. And they were so overwhelmed by the beauty of tulips that a huge, huge tulip mania set in. And I'm going to just give you a couple of facts, if you don't mind, like that. I've said my kingdom for a tulip because, quite honestly, people would give anything for one bulb. So tulips are then, and I'm going to read it so you don't, in case you can't see. Tulips were introduced into Europe about 1510, and soon the demand exceeded the supply and the price rose astronomically, as it would. So even Jan van Heesem could barely command 5,000 guilders for a painting, whereas a single bulb of one tulip, this one called Admiral Liefkens, it changed hands for 4,400 guilders at an auction in 1637. Another one, another bulb, I don't know why they're all named after admirals, another bulb, Admiral van Enkhuizen, was even more expensive at 5,400 guilders for one bulb. And a single bulb was quite enough for a dowry for your daughter. Imagine, a bulb is a dowry. At the same auction of the tulips, 99 lots, that's 99 bulbs, realized 90,000 guilders, which was an incredible amount of money, but I don't know what a shekel is today, but 36 million. I've tried to find out. Now, the thing was, because the sale was held in February 1637, the bulbs were in the ground. And each bulb was sold by the weight that it weighed when it was planted. The sales were made and resales were made over and over again without the bulb ever leaving the ground. That was perfectly okay as long as the weather didn't change when the bulbs rotted. Well, the crash came in 1637, and very many ordinary Dutch people, including some very famous painters, were completely ruined. So that's just a story that we all know about, and you can see the love of it in the paintings. This is by Balthazar van der Ast, again, always bringing in a living thing, like a little bee or a little insect or a little butterfly, to sort of make the painting come alive. I'm just showing you 2 or 3 because they're quite wonderful when you think about them as a very small sort of thing, like a tiny icon almost. So this one on an oak panel, again, the incredible vitality of the tulips and then the butterfly coming in and sitting on it. Just amazing. Now, the other thing that the Dutch imported at great quantities was Chinese porcelain, and that's very interesting for me because I collect it. And the porcelain came, it was export ware, it was particularly made for the Dutch market. And when it came, it was something that you had if you were a wealthy burgher. You had rugs, you had flower paintings, you had porcelain, you had silver, and you had glass. And so porcelain begins to appear in the paintings. So this one here, this is a Ming bowl, and it's got 2 blue lines around the bottom and 2 blue lines around the rim. Now, Arabelle will know about this, wherever she is. So these blue lines and the particular color of cobalt, underglazed blue, will probably tell you that it could be Ming. This actually is Ming, and I can show you a real one, where you see again the blue lines around the bottom and the top. Can you see that? This little bowl dates to 1499, so it would already have been 14, 15, 16, 17. It was nearly 300 years old, the porcelain, when it came to Holland. This little bowl was under the sea for about 500 years, until the 20th century when I bought it, and it's got no shine on it, because the sea and the salt ate away the shine of the glaze. That is just to show you a real Ming bowl. Now, I found these Ming bowls, which are a painting of Ming, and I had to show you, because these are beautiful. They're Ming. They were found in street market somewhere in Holland, and they're painted by a painter from Uzbekistan. And I think that's he's an Uzbek, born in 1957, and I'm trying to find him because I'd like to buy it, obviously. So it's very beautiful that here he is still carrying on that tradition. The Dutch also imported the kraakware. The kraak was the name of the boat that carried the porcelain, and the kraakware always looks like this with different sections around the edge. It's very densely patterned, but in the middle, always wonderful nature scenes you can have a blue bathroom in it, of geese and ducks and flowers and water, because the Chinese had enormous sensitivity to nature and to flowers. This is actually also one of my plates. So you see a kraak bowl here in this painting, paired up with quite simply a big, big bowl of lemons and a couple of pomegranates. And this is a Wanli kraak porcelain bowl. So it is really a marvelous part of their painting that includes the Chinese porcelain. But they also make very small paintings. And I love this idea. You don't have to do a big splashy abstract. You don't have to take over an entire floor of the silo gallery with a whole lot of empty bottles. You don't have to do that. You can simply do a tiny thing like that on a board, and look at it. I mean, you could meditate for days and days on this absolutely beautiful little painting. You see more and more. You see how the gooseberries cast shadows down here. Some of them are riper than others. How this leaf is turning. So part of the leaf is in shadow, that leaf is coming into light, and this whole twig is reversed. I mean, it's very simple, but you quite literally could sit and listen to music and look at that for a very, very long time. It's in the Cleveland Art Museum. Now, Adriaan Coorte, you may not have heard of, but he specialized in these very, very small paintings. This is another one which is quite existential because the butterfly is going to disappear in a second. So you're looking at it, it's poised, it's breathing stillness, but the butterfly could just go. Well, the estimate on this was £500,000, but it went for over 2 million. So people do appreciate them. So we're going to leave Holland and go up to France. It's slightly tragic when we get to France in the 18th century, because we're looking at the Rococo in France, which was the style of the French aristocrats through the 18th century. And just to show you one of the most famous works, which was The Swing by Jean-Honoré Fragonard. And here you have a dalliance happening in the middle of a verdant forest or a verdant park, and you have statuary of a Cupid saying, shh, don't tell. Meanwhile, the lover, who is a priest, is busy giving his girlfriend a swing while the potential lover is looking up her skirt, because she very cleverly, accidentally kicks off her slipper, and that's what happens. And she's very pink, and she is actually pretty much a rose herself. There's not much to choose between the girl, who is a rose, who will, of course, wilt, and probably has a few thorns, and the roses themselves. The point about this frou-frou style of the Rococo was it expressed a time when people were living in a sort of theatre of the unreal world, an unreal theatre. Everybody is young and beautiful. It's always going to be picnics every day. The sun will always shine. We will have picnics in the Garden of Versailles. We will have lutes, and we'll have tambourines, and we have little slaves. And we do not realize what's coming. This is part of a set of 4 paintings, and it was commissioned by the Comtesse du Barry, who was an absolute goer. I mean, her life story is pretty much like Emma Hamilton. I'm not here to rubbish Emma Hamilton, but Emma Hamilton was a very, very tough cookie indeed. You couldn't get near Horatio without giving Emma a lot of money, at least a few diamonds or something. It's quite true. I mean, he, as an old man, he was completely and utterly, well, he wasn't old because he died at Trafalgar, but so these were, the Du Barry was exactly the same type of person. But you see, the girl is the rose, the girl, the whole setting of it, it's a bouquet of it's a scented garden, and it's all about love and the pursuit of love, and never mind the bad things that come with all of that. And she had these wonderful 4 tableaux made, but they didn't stay in France very long. They ended up in New York, the Frick. So again, a parasol, the sunshine, the pink roses as a symbol of love, now no longer anything to do with the Virgin Mary that I told you yesterday. And what is going to happen is that it's all going to disappear very, very quickly with the rumble of the tumbrils as the aristocrats are rumbled into the Place de la Concorde and beheaded. And you may not know, and I didn't know until a few years ago, because I was in Paris, that there was only one guillotine. And when they had a whole lot of French nobles awaiting execution in Lyon, they dismantled the guillotine and took it to Lyon and reassembled it there. Imagine, there was only one guillotine, and they killed so many people with it. But they couldn't believe that was ever going to end, that the terror would ever come. So it's quite tragic when you look at these paintings now. In England, very wonderfully, we didn't have that terrible revolution. Everybody thought it would come, but it didn't. And this is Thomas Lawrence, a famous portrait painter in England, simply making again the idea of the freshness of the pansy and the freshness of the child, and the little child with pansies in her skirt. This painting is in the Kenwood House in London, if you come to Kenwood. So I want to go on with the Victorians now. And the Victorians, in fact, naturally did everything very thoroughly, because it was in their nature, unfortunately. And that meant that they understood the language of flowers, and they used the language of flowers in many of their paintings. In Victorian England, paintings were there to say things. The concept that painting could be for itself hadn't really arrived. And Victorian painting, particularly for the rising urban middle class, was all about saying something. Telling the story of the Bible, telling the story of the English kings, telling the story of their own rise, their social upward mobility, telling stories to their daughters of what happens if you don't behave. There's always a very strong double entendre in most Victorian painting. And the language of flowers, every girl had to know it. This just gives you a few little samples of the sort of thing. Heather for solitude, daisy for attachment, cornflower for riches, yeah? And edelweiss for cleanliness, and so on. So the Victorians, just before, when Victoria comes through, we are painting with a very precise technique, very accurate. And one of the people that painted very many plants and flowers was William Hunt. Sorry. William Hunt. In fact, he painted so many birds' nests, he was called William Bird's Nest Hunt, or Bird's Nest Hunt. This little painting of robin's eggs in a nest with primrose was probably an arranged still life. But now you see we're looking very, very accurately at the plants. There's nothing dreamy about it. There's nothing to do with money here. This is not a statement of my wealth, as it would have been in Amsterdam. This is just an almost Darwinian interest in plants and birds' eggs. But as we come to the real high Victorian paintings that were narrative paintings, storytelling paintings, that sold like hotcakes all over the world in the form of steel engravings, we get flowers being used very symbolically. This is a painting which I absolutely love. It's called The Order of Release. The Order of Release, 1746. In other words, the theme is set in the past. And it's by John Everett Mille, who became President of the Royal Academy. In this painting, it shows us a lot of things. First of all, who is the dominant figure in the painting? It is the wife, yes? Well, first of all, the wife is the only person whose face you see. So she is the dominant figure in the painting, and the face of the jailer and of the husband and the child are all turned back. She's got a blue veil, and she's carrying a baby, which subliminally reminds you of the purity of the Virgin, counteracting a rather mean story that she sold her virtue to get her husband out of jail. I'm sure she didn't. But there she has a little note which allows her husband to come out. He's a Scot, of course, and immediately he's welcomed by his beloved border collie, who jumps up and licks his hand. In Victorian paintings, then, dogs are a symbol of marital faithfulness. Doggy is there to show how faithful is the girl. But remember, it's midwinter, because we can see that these are little yellow primroses. Yeah? It's midwinter, but she's barefoot, and the child is barefoot. So without even trying, you've already got an entire story. It's midwinter, the woman is very poor, so poor she hasn't even got a sandal. Her child has no jersey and no socks. And it is February, and there's almost snow on the ground. And she comes there proudly, and she gets her husband out. So the Order of the Release by Mille, building up a respect for people of other backgrounds, perhaps, and classes, breaking down these class barriers. Another issue was that girls and boys could not get together ever, privately, and so they had to do these surreptitious assignation. And this is Arthur Hughes, a painting called April Love, and it's in Tate Britain. And the ivy in this painting is alluding then to the long levity of love, the clinginess, if you like. The girl here is very torn because it's a long, long time and it's a very fragile love. So you can see there the ivy very, very clearly as she looks back and she doesn't quite know what to do. In this painting, Broken Vows, again the ivy is there, but more to the point, the girl has come to meet her suitor, and they always meet through a crack in the wall because they're not allowed to meet any other way. And this time he's come with another woman, and we are on her side, literally. And she's heartbroken, so she gasps like that. She's wearing a black jacket because she's probably in mourning, which almost certainly means she can't marry now because she's in mourning for a year for her mother. She's wearing a black veil as well, and her bracelet she's thrown it down, you probably can't see it's there, and here is an image of suffering in the form of an iris. So these paintings told many stories, and they were very, very popular in the 19th century. William Holman Hunt's Isabella in the Pot of Basil is again about this wonderful herb, basil. And basil smells very strongly, as you know, you probably have it in your kitchen. She was in love with a man, and her family and her brothers didn't approve, and they killed him out in the forest. And she went into the forest and got his head and brought it back and buried it in a pot and planted basil over it because of its very... I know, grim. It's a sort of story that the late pre-Raphaelites really liked. So William Holman Hunt and the Pot of Basil. Ophelia in the River is one of the most popular paintings in Tate Britain, and it's worth about 33 million, I think, now, at the last count. And Ophelia there has been spurned by Hamlet, And what's more, Hamlet has killed her father. It's not too sure whether it is the killing of her father that's driven her mad or the rejection by Hamlet. But she launches herself into a brook, and as she floats down, she sings a song, and the flowers float down all around her. She takes up this attitude, which is very ambiguous. On the one hand, it's the attitude of a bride on her wedding night. You see she's wearing a bridal gown. She is lying back, wrists, arms up, throat erogenous zone, all the light is falling on her throat, mouth half open, eyes half closed. It depends who you are as to how you see this. You might, on the other hand, see this as a gesture of crucifixion. You might see it as a surrender to death, a gesture of crucifixion, even a gesture of prayer. So it's very, very, very polyvalent, shall I say. I don't like that word, but it can be seen in different ways. When down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook, her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old tunes as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and imbued unto that element, but long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to a muddy death. And that's, of course, Hamlet. Well, Dante Gabriel Rossetti was very, very much in love with Elizabeth Siddal, who was the model for Mille's Ophelia. And Elizabeth Siddal had lots of pain, as some women do, and she took laudanum. And she took a lot of laudanum because it was addictive. And one night, while they were all out having dinner, she went home early, and she took a lot of laudanum. And when Dante got back, he found her unconscious and called the doctor, and they sat by her bed, but they couldn't save her. They didn't think about stomach pumps and ambulances, and she died. And when they buried her, he buried his one and only book of all his poetry. 7 years later, his friends said, "You must get it," and so he got the book out. Now, when he painted this posthumously, he shows Lizzie Siddal as a sort of memory with her red hair, and she's a white poppy is being dropped into her lap, which of course is an image of opium, which was the ingredient of laudanum. So she became addicted to opium. Many people in London and Paris actually smoked opium at this time. In fact, the dove is there because his pet name for her was Lizzie. His pet name for her was Dove. He called her the Dove Divine. So this painting, although it's meant to be somebody else, is really a portrait of Lizzie Siddal painted after she died. When we go to poppies, as I mentioned, England cultivated poppies widely, and they were used for opium. And of course, England has been making a great deal of money out of the opium trade. We only have ourselves to blame. And the poppies are, of course, very much painted by Monet as well. But here, this is a painting by John Singer Sargent, who I really want you to go and look at again. Because we don't find his subject very interesting, we fail to look at his amazing technique. That's just, and this is one of his most beautiful paintings in Tate Britain. It's called Carnation, Lily, Lily, Rose, and it's Dorothy and Polly Barnard. These two sisters that he painted, one was 11 and the other, I think, was 7. He chose them because the color of the hair was exactly right. And they are shown here with Chinese lanterns, setting them up in this amazing garden among all the lilies and the flowers. And as a picture of flowers and children, it's just wonderful. So there they are. Dolly was 11 and Polly was 7. And you come a bit closer, you see the wonderful painting and the lovely sheen on their hair and everything else. So this is almost like a sort of English Impressionist painting, really. Again, when you see him painting magnolias, you're very close to what I would call English Impressionism. And I'm going to go on, or rather I want to take you, because I've still got plenty of time, to show you some real Impressionist paintings in it. This is an American painter, rather unknown over here, called William Merritt Chase. And again, it's the abundance of the vase of flowers. The girl is seen almost as a flower. You don't see her face. Her face is probably not important. It's not really a portrait. But you do see that she's wearing a sort of kimono, and she's carrying a Japanese fan. And you're alerted straight away to the fact that we're now in that period where Japonism was the great fashion. So Japonism is the term that really kicked in towards the very end, the end of the 19th century. And you see, so much stuff was pouring into France. The Japanese ports had reopened to trade from the West in 1854, and all sorts of bric-a-brac just flew into France. In 1862, there was a little curio shop called Le Port Chinoise, which opened near the Louvre, and you could buy little fans and little bits and pieces, little knickknacks. And people started to think about the Far East: fans, kimonos, lacquered boxes, scrolls, all kinds of things. And then at the Great Exhibition, Japan had its own stand, its own stand, and that, of course, after that, there was really no going back. And Japanese things became very, very fashionable. The Japanese prints, you could buy them on the left bank, because the prints that were not very good, the seconds, were used to wrap up the porcelain that was sent to Europe. And you could smooth them all out and iron them a bit, and you could put them up on your wall. And this is what Van Gogh did, and Monet, and lots of other young French painters. So this is a Hokusai painting of peonies from about 1834. You know, the Chinese sensitivity, Chinese and Japanese, is so amazing. They're sensitive to nature. And these two doves, who've probably been married forever, because you know they marry forever, and the chrysanthemum, or their peonies in the background, and look at the colors and the tones of it. So beautiful. And you see, you must realize that after the French Revolution, there was a big separation of church and state, that there was a searching for something new that wouldn't be embedded in the Christian tradition, but wouldn't be savage either. That came later. That came very soon after the turn of the century. But by the end of the century, it was a great love affair with all of this wonderful culture that wasn't Christian, wasn't Western. And the marvelous screens, the golden screens that came over. And these were the things that inspired many of the late 19th century painters. There's another wonderful, wonderful screen painting. Van Gogh himself was deeply influenced, so he painted these wonderful blossoms up against the blue sky. And when he went down to Arles, he really thought he was going to find the Japan of the South, he was going to have an artist's colony, and he was going to experience nature just the way the Japanese did, this tremendous love of flowers and plants. As you come on towards the end, we have a sort of drifting away from reality in the work of the symbolists. And I want to just show you two or three post-impressionist flower paintings. So Oudenaarde is the leader, really, of one of the leaders with Gogh of the symbolist movement. And this is his version of Ophelia. Here she is looking up at this amazing, glorious arrangement of flowers. And why is it that these colors are as they are? Why does it not look like the Dutch paintings? The reason is very simple. It's because it's not oil painting. It's done with oils pastels. Oil pastels have got very intense color, and that you can smudge them in. You get these marvelous, marvelous effects. The symbolists always are dreamy and drifting away. The eyes are closed. There's another reality. And it's very fin de siècle, symbolists. So you can compare Oudenaarde's painting then with this work by Paul Gauguin, which has got much more muscle in a sense, much hotter in tones. And he was painting this in 1896. That was his second Tahiti period. It's quite interesting that he took a break from painting Tahitian girls and paintings about the loss of virginity, something which he knew quite a lot about, I suspect. And he painted a very nice flower painting for us right there. So both of these two that I've shown you are actually in the National Gallery. If we look at Gauguin a little bit later, you see how the colors are beginning to become very weird. Of course, he's most famous for detaching his color from reality. He breaks down the relationship of color and reality completely. And you can see how so many of the Fauve painters, also Matisse, in fact, strongly influenced by Gauguin, 1890. So he only had about 3.5 years to live when he made this painting. So he died in 1903. Paul Cézanne, also very near the end of his life, painting tulips. Now, there are not many works like this by Cézanne, trust me. Trust me. It's mostly his landscapes, his Montagne Saint-Victoire, and his fruit. So this is really quite interesting. And what's interesting is the breaking up of the background and all these tones into what's called taches of colour, stripes, little blocks of colour done like that, several streaks of the brush together in blocks. That's his particular style. So we're going to end with Monet, because we started with water and the need for water yesterday, and I talked about Isaiah, the water bubbling up in the desert, and now we're going to look at the flowers floating in water, because we're just going to end by looking at, and I've got 5 minutes, which is great, by looking at the water gardens of Monet. So the house is actually quite small. It looks pretty big there, but it's not. And at first he rented it for quite a long time, and after about 10 years of renting it, he had enough money and he bought it. And as soon as he bought it, he tried to get permission to divert a little tributary of the river Rue, R-U, which itself was a tributary of the Ebt, which is a tributary of the Seine. He wanted to divert it into a bit of land on the other side of the road. Now, if you've ever had a project, this was a project. He was up against the mayor. I don't know about Alice, she probably supported him, but he wanted a water garden. That's all he wanted. And he bought the land the other side of the road, between the road and the water, and he diverted it. So he made his wonderful, wonderful water garden. And anybody who's ever had a project knows how it's a bit like being pregnant. It's all you can think about, night and day. This is the modern bridge as it is now. But I think if you look at the photograph that I found, Historic Archive, you'll see that actually the original bridge was probably quite a bit higher and more arched. And you have the wisteria and the willows coming down, which rise to meet you in the reflections. In thinking about the bridge, he was very much influenced by the Japanese woodblock prints that he'd been collecting for years, all his life actually, mainly by Hiroshige. And both of these that I found show bridges, very, very high bridges. This bridge here is almost a semicircle, and it was a long time before I actually understood about the bridge. But before we talk about the bridge, I want to introduce Henri Bergson. I'm not sure if anybody here knows about Bergson. If you do, please indulge me while I share with the others. He has kind of been blotted out pretty thoroughly. However, he was very important at the turn of the century, and he was actually awarded the Légion d'honneur in 1904, and he published his books in 1904, and he was Jewish, French, half Polish, half Irish. Well, he was Jewish, but I suppose one of his parents was Polish Jewish and the other was Irish Jewish. Anyway, that's who he was. He had all the magic of the Irish, all the imagination and unstoppable dreaminess of the Irish, plus perhaps the sadness of the Poles in a sense. So he's got a very, very, very sensitive face. And his philosophy was taken up very strongly by Monet. Monet, of course, was an atheist, like all of the Impressionists. You can't call Cézanne an Impressionist because he isn't, and towards the end of his life he was quite certain, as he was painting Montagne Saint-Victoire, he was quite certain that he couldn't express the unity of the world unless he could express it, feel it in himself. And he had a very strong spiritual experience in terms of his understanding of landscape, of his own beloved Provence. But in terms of Monet, Monet really was very strong friends with Bergson. And his philosophy was that time is not broken up. The very idea that we've got years, we've got months. Each month is divided into weeks. The weeks go into days. The days are hours, and the hours are minutes. And you know, you're on that treadmill. And this is a minute. I don't care what you say, it's a minute. You're 5 minutes late, and that's what you are. Or you were born then, and it's now 10, 20, 50, 70 years later. Time dominates everything, our thinking, because with time we can put things in place. We can arrange history, we can go backwards and put things into their proper little slots. He said, that's not what time... He said, time isn't like that. Time is joined up. Time is a continuous flow. It flows. It's always flowing. There is no point where you can break 1 second from another, 1 minute from another. There's a flow. And that is what, once you've got that idea, you'll understand Monet, because Monet was trying to paint the flow of time. All his paintings are meditations on the flow of time. As light passes over the surface of the water, as the clouds move, the composition changes, because the movement, the flow of time is making the painting. He's not making the painting. He also had the idea that there was what he called an élan vital, a kind of vital spirit in everything. Now, he's not roping in any received faith set or anything like that. He is simply saying that there is an élan vital, a vital spirit in absolutely everything. And as I was mentioning to Terra Nicolai at lunch, I discovered so recently that Plato, at his academy in Athens, which is outside Athens, he and all the philosophers at the academy believed that trees were sentient. That's Plato, with his tremendous logic. And, of course, all philosophers in Athens were vegetarians because of this, that the whole world was sentient. So the élan vital, the flow of everything, the vital spirit and everything, is what inspires Monet. Now let's look at the paintings. I'm not going to say much more. When you look at the bridge, I say to myself, am I looking at a landscape? Now, what should a landscape have? Well, a landscape should have, well, come on, look, you can, what should a landscape normally have? What? A sky, what else? Very good, who said horizon? Very good, gold star, Robin. What else? Somebody from the back? Trees that you can see, sort of a horizon, distance, a sky, anything else? Sorry? Foreground and background, exactly. Recession, it should have all of those things. And it should have, above all, yes, recession, it should be a vedute, a view. But you know, we've got nothing like that. We've got no view, no sky, no trees, no recession, no mountains, no clouds, no receding streams. I don't see this as a landscape at all. I see it, it's an environment. You are embraced by nature. It's summer. And you can feel that what's under the water and what's above the water and what's in the trees, all one thing. So you can imagine all the things flying. You can imagine gurgle, gurgle, the little frogs' eggs under the water. And you can just imagine standing on the bridge. And you say to yourself, which side of the bridge will I walk from? Will I walk from, because you can't see where the bridge comes from, where the bridge goes. Will I walk from this side over there, or will I walk from that side over there? Which side will I walk from? I know where I'll walk from. I'll walk from the dark side toward the light side. The fact that the bridge is pushed by the frame of the painting and becomes like a spring, it arches up, it gives the sense of the arch that makes the whole square work together. It was only, well, a few years ago, when I was talking to a professor from Japanese university, that I understood about the bridge. In Japan, the bridge is very, very curved, and at the bottom of the bridge, it came down very steeply to the ground, and you couldn't walk up it. You had to take a run at it and get onto it, and then go up and down. Well, that seemed very funny. I agree, you're all laughing, but it isn't funny. It isn't funny at all. It's because the bridge in Japanese culture represents passing over from your material life to your spiritual life, or through death, from physical life through to a spiritual life through death. All Shinto shrines have got water and a flat bridge, because you walk over water you cross the bridge. So the crossing of the bridge is deeply symbolic. And it explains why Monet's paintings are so tremendously powerful, because they're so simple. There's no narrative, there's no lesson, there's no anything. But it does show you this thing of the crossing over. So we go on to look at the surface of the lily pond. As we look at the surface of the lily pond, we are looking at a preoccupation with light, not shown through the process of something casting a shadow on something else, but simply pouring down like that, and on the surface of water, which reflects it up. And as Monet goes on, he becomes more and more obsessed with seeing the world upside down, seeing the sky and the clouds, but seeing it looking down at the surface of the water. That is one. And this wonderful Japanese word here, ukiyo-e, means floating world. Well, nothing could describe Monet's paintings better than that Japanese word, that the lilies are floating. As you look between the lilies, you see the willow tree coming up towards you, because it's the reflections of the willows that are coming up. You understand? Right. As you look at the lily pond, you can see that there's no limit. There's no frame. Art has always had frame, because if you haven't got a frame, how do you compose a painting? Paintings are meant to be composed. They're meant to have diagonals and recessions and pyramids and circles, and think of any artist you like. No, he doesn't care. There's no frame. They're limitless. They're unframed. They're literally, you're just looking at something, and there's no limit, no frame. And also there's no formal relationship between these lily pads. Could be floating around. In some of the paintings, they could just be drifting apart. When he painted these paintings, the one you're looking at right now, he painted this during the First World War. And by reading a lot about him and trying to understand, he felt that the weeping willows represented his sense of the sadness of the loss of the young lives during the war. Because remember, the war was going on pretty much all around him. He was just north of Paris. So he paints these paintings all through the war. And again, the reflection of the willow trees coming up, the pink lilies that are floating on the top, that will close at night. Every autumn, he took all the lilies out of the pond, put them into safe place, put them under cover in their pots, and in the spring they were all planted out again. This is a particularly good one, because you know what time, it's sunset, and you can see the sunset shining on the water, and the lily pads seem to be drifting apart. It seems to be about space. It's a kind of spatial painting. It doesn't obey any of the normal rules of composition at all. It simply doesn't. But it does obey Bergson's rules of timelessness and of a continual flow, of an élan vital. The colors are amazing here, the golds and the purples. This, just to finish, as it came towards the end, December of 1925, he became very, very ill, and he felt very unhappy about a lot of his work. He took it all outside in his garden, he burnt it. He burnt an enormous amount of paintings on a bonfire. But as he became closer to death, the only thing that mattered was to take up every single water lily and put it away nice and safely into the potting sheds for the spring. And then he lay down and he died, and he was buried with a secular civil ceremony in the village. And Georges Clemenceau, who'd been the mayor of Montmartre when all these boys were so young in 1870 during the Commune, Georges Clemenceau went on to become the first president of France. And Georges Clemenceau was there, loyal to the end, and stood by him. So this is a modern, I just want to show this is a modern, beautiful modern Chinese painting, totally contemporary, by a young Chinese painter, to show you that in spite of everything they've been through in the Cultural Revolution, they are still painting exquisitely. So that's a very, very contemporary painting by a very young Chinese. So I think leaving us with those thoughts of the flow of time, the flow of light, the élan vital, I think we're just going to leave ourselves bathing in Monet, and we'll stop for today. Thank you very much.